Pets!
What up?
It is Shameless Plugs Podcast, your favorite writing podcast, because obviously we're the best.
Well,
so,
clearly,
duh. Who would have thought that you would be listening to anything else right now?
Who would have thought that a podcast called Shameless Plugs, we would start it out by plugging how great we are? Who would have thought?
Oh my god. Well, I think we've got to plug somebody else who's joining us today.
We do have to plug somebody else.
Yeah, we are joined on the show today by DK Marie, and we are excited.
Of course, we're
always excited.
We only bring on people we like, so we're always
true.
Excited.
Yeah, always. So, hi!
Hello.
Good morning, or afternoon, or what, it's morning for us.
It's morning for us, yeah. And it is hot.
It is hot.
Sorry,
yes.
weather.
I'm jealous. It's not hot here.
Well,
really?
But,
no. I mean, if we finally had one warm day, but it's been a really cold spring. I'm a little bitter.
You're up in Michigan, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. But it's not, like, enjoyably hot here.
No.
It's, like,
so
walk outside, can't breathe, sticky hot already, and that's no fun.
You step outside and you're walking through pudding is what it feels
Pretty
like.
much,
it's
ugh.
Well, I hate the cold. Don't ask me why I'm in Michigan, but I hate so I would take the sticky heat over freezing 65 degrees.
I mean, you just gotta drive 4 hours south and you'll have it.
So,
yeah.
And I hate this hot weather that I'm dealing with, so it sounds like we just need to switch houses for a couple months or something.
There you go, yeah, that'd be great.
That works for me.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Sure your wife would be cool with it.
Yeah, I'm sure she would be totally fine with some strange woman living in our house.
Yeah.
Not that you're strange, but you're,
Yeah, well, no, I mean, you would just leave, and DK could come live with your wife, because your wife is awesome, so...
My wife would probably like living with her more than me, so...
I think we all have those days. I think we all have those days with our spouses.
Yeah, so...
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyway!
Hello, Hive Mind.
Yeah, I know, right?
So you might be dealing with cold weather. Hey, segue coming up.
Oh, here it comes!
But you write steamy romance, so...
Yeah.
Yes, I gotta find some way to stay warm.
Exactly.
Woo!
Yes. So, you just had a novel come out not too long ago. We actually featured an excerpt from it on a couple weeks ago on our show. So, tell us about, the novel that you just had come out.
Oh, I'm so terrible at this. The plugging of my book, I'm terrible. It's great, read it. Well, more specifically, what do you want? Would you like me to read the blurb, the synopsis, talk about why I like it?
Yeah,
whatever you want to say about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to give us a little bit of a brief synopsis, so our listeners can get a vibe for it, and then tell us what you like about it,
and exactly how great it is, so all of our listeners will go out and buy it if they didn't already from hearing your excerpt.
Right, I mean,
get the ones who weren't smart enough, and I love our listeners, so they're all brilliant. But the ones who weren't smart enough to go buy it after listening to the excerpt, now they're going to go buy it after hearing you talk about how great it is.
Okay. Well, so I did pull up the synopsis. Should I just read this or just talk about this naturally? Because, I mean, honestly, I'm terrible at selling my own stuff.
Let's do the synopsis, and then that'll probably prompt some questions from us, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Greta Meyer is almost 30, yet struggles to separate her ambitions from those of her parents. Growing up in a bubble of privilege and rigid expectations, Greta understands what is required of her and always follows the rules. The only exception was when she broke off her engagement with her arrogant and controlling fiancé, Blake. Okay, she's rebelled twice, but nobody knows about Jacob Grimm. The way his careless good looks and unrefined bearing had fascinated Greta, making it impossible for her to stay away. Upon meeting, they'd struck up an easy conversation, one that rapidly turned from friendly to sensual. They ended up in bed, where Greta learned all about sexual freedom and unrestrained passion. Afterwards, reality crashed around her, leaving her embarrassed with her recklessness and disappointed when Jacob walked away, never contacting her. Weeks passed, and Greta tried to bury the memory of their wild afternoon. She's not wholeheartedly successful, but interning at her father's investment firm, Swift Financial, has helped. Her father hinted if she impresses him during her internship, after she receives her master's in computer science, she'll run his IT department. He's a hard man to please, but Greta craves his validation, his belief that she's responsible and smart enough to manage something so important. Walking into what is supposed to be an uneventful new client meeting, Greta finds Jacob sitting at her father's conference table. It turns out he doesn't work for a delivery company. He had been hired by the delivery company to install a vintage chandelier. Jacob runs a business from his home, restoring and repairing antiques. He is Swift's newest client. Remembering her uninhibited behavior with him is disconcerting enough, but now she has to add the worry of her career. Her father doesn't tolerate mistakes, and Jacob's a big one. He needs to stay in the past. Like Greta, Jacob is less than thrilled with their surprise reunion. He can't grasp why the bored debutante, who's been looking for a scandalous fling with a man from the wrong side of town, is sitting across from him at Swift. Should I keep going?
Whatever you are comfortable with.
You know what? I'll probably stop from there, because now as I'm reading this, I'm thinking I don't want to give away too much.
Understood.
So,
well, and this is a multi-part series, correct? This is book 1 of 4, if I remember correctly, isn't it?
yes.
Okay, so how do you, this is obviously a romance novel, and how do you maintain kind of one of the things that stands out to me? I am not a romance reader, so forgive me if I'm off here, but they seem like it's a more intense genre. How do you maintain that kind of intensity over the span of multiple novels?
Well, the theme of the stories are the same, and everybody knows everybody, but it's not actually the same character through all. It's not actually the same main characters through every story. It's completely different characters for each story, but they all know each other somehow. So if you read the first book and you love Jacob and Greta, you'll get to visit them in every other book, but they're no longer the main characters.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
That's cool.
So you kind of had to do a little bit of world building then, I guess, to put all these people in the same place.
Right.
Yeah, with romance, it's very character-driven, so I had to do a lot of character building, where all of my stories take place in Michigan and Detroit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So no fantasy world building, but their lives had to all interact and follow through.
Right. Now, these characters from the reading that you did on one of our previous episodes, you're building characters that have, for example, Jacob, I know he has some surprising sides to him that came out in the reading that you did. He's not what he seems on the surface. How do you tap into characters to give them those levels of depth and make them more interesting?
Well, usually when I start every one of my books, I have character interviews that I do, and it helps me learn them and notice all of their different flaws and their wounds, and basically I get to know them before I write the story.
Sounds like a plotter trait.
I'm not even going to look at you right now.
I'm aware.
That's cool. I mean, one of the things that our show does is it puts on display all the different processes out there for writing. Mm-hmm. I mean, the character interview thing, I think, is a really cool way to kick off a novel, especially one that is going to be very character-driven, that might be set in a world that people are familiar with, so you need to bring kind of that depth in with your character. So I think that's cool.
Yeah.
So, I don't do it.
I know you don't.
It's one of my favorite parts.
Really?
Is the character interview. Yes, getting to know them. It's really fun. And then as I'm doing this interview sheet that I have set out, as it comes to me, then dialogue and scenes come to me at the same time. So to me, it's really fun.
So when you're coming up, when those scenes and dialogue are coming to you, do you find that you end up using a lot of those in the final product? Or do they inform the character and then you don't come back to them, really?
No, a lot of times I do end up using them. Or if I save them with the idea of maybe on my newsletter, I might release those scenes that never made it in because they're backstory.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
But
Nice.
I found all of them to be useful so far.
Yeah. So do you find yourself, like, once you are doing, like, your interview, do you actually, like, talk to your characters? Or are you like, how do you feel about eating fish?
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes.
I would totally do something like that. I'd be like, sit across from me, character. Let's have a conversation.
Well, yeah. Well, then by the end of the book, it's like they're real, and I write, all my characters live where I live.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like by the time the story is done, I almost want to be like when I'm with people, like Jacob and Greta, they went to this restaurant before, and I expect to see them, or they become so real by the end. I look over my shoulder looking for them.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, in this corner, this is where this thing happened. Doesn't
Yes.
anyone else know?
Yeah.
Oh, right here, that's where his brother Will lives, in that apartment over there when we're driving through Detroit.
So
that's
great.
awesome.
It's like Pokemon Go except for authors.
I caught a Greta.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's so good. I like that.
I thought I was a plotter. That kind of puts me to shame
It
a little
really
bit.
does. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
I'm very impressed right now.
I'm sorry.
Well, thank
It's
you.
a good thing. It's
Oh, I thought you said oppressed.
no, impressed.
Oh, okay.
Why would that impress me?
I don't know. I thought maybe you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm such a terrible plotter compared to DK. Like, I thought that's where you were.
Oh my God, she interviews her character. My freedom is shackled. I mean, no. That's not what just happened here.
I can send you my character interview if you would ever like to try it out.
I actually would like that because I do like a character biography ahead of time, but I've never done the interview. I've
Really?
I've heard of it, but I've never done the. Now I have conversations with my characters, but it's not officially, and I don't do it with every character. It's
Yeah.
not part of my process. It's just I'll be in the shower, and all of a sudden Alex will start talking
Yeah,
to me.
you're like,
and,
oh, okay, dude, what's up?
Or actually, it's more like I listen in on them talking to each other.
Nice.
But
Yeah.
yes, please do send it to me. I'd like to try that actually.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay.
Man,
Yeah.
look at that.
Yeah, and then too, because it's so emotionally based with romance too, there's the one book that it's called Wounds and Flaws Thesaurus or something, and they have questions in there, and those are perfect because romance is conflict and emotional based. Like I have to pick what their issues are because that's really what they're fighting against is their own issues.
Mm-hmm.
That's what causes a lot of the conflict too. So I go through those too and have to pick out, because sometimes I know right away what their big issues are and what their flaws are, but then I have to make sure that they're reacting correctly
Right.
to what's their hold up, their issues.
Gotcha. So mentioning that, do you find that you do a lot of research when you're building characters, or is it more of an intuitive process for you?
It's a little bit of both. Like it seems like as I'm plotting through and learning about them, then I have to do research on them as I learn more about them, just to make sure that I'm correct about it.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So, how much of, you've mentioned, that this is set in kind of the area where you live. How much do you find, whether it's in setting or character or whatever, how much do you find that the real world is influencing what you're creating on the page?
Well, when it comes to where they live, reality plays a lot into it. I mean, some places are made up, like where Greta lives, it's a combination of a couple cities. It doesn't actually exist. So I'm just taking bits and pieces. But their locations or where he lives exists, where Jacob does. So the setting has to be realistic. I have to make sure I'm naming the right streets and like the right places. But when it comes to the characters, I don't want to base them off anybody I know, because I want my characters to grow and change by themselves, where if I'm trying to base it off a friend or somebody in my life, then their personalities are going to take over in the book, and I don't want that to stifle whatever the story is I'm trying to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. So, I guess why romance? Like, I think I think we all have a reason why we write in the genre that we write. You know, I mean, J.A. just grew up with superheroes in his backyard, and that's why he hangs out with them all the time.
Pretty much.
So, you know, why romance for you?
I'm glad you asked this because on a very selfish level, I was about to ask the same question because this is the first time we've had a romance author on the show. So you know, we've talked to fantasy people, we've talked to sci-fi people. I understand that, and I wanted to hear from a romance writer why you do what you do.
Thank you for being our first romance writer.
Yes.
My pleasure. Well, I didn't grow up reading romance. I didn't start even reading it probably till 10 or 15 years ago. It just, when I was younger, it didn't appeal to me, the old style romance. I grew up actually reading adventure and thrillers, and horror was my favorite. I grew up on Stephen King and Anne Rice, and I still read all the way across, but I tend to be very pessimistic about the real world, and romance is my escape because no matter how bad everything is, it's going to end up okay, and it's a lot of fun for me to write. No matter how dark my characters or how bad their past is, they're still going to end up happy and in love and with the person that they need to be with or want to be with, where in the real world it just doesn't work out that way. And so I like that feeling. It's a lot of, I like to do the dialogue and the banter, and there's scenes, it makes me laugh, it makes me feel lighter. It's a lot of fun.
I like that.
We were about to hive mind again because I was about to say exactly the same thing.
That's awesome. It's like just a little bright spot in the world. It makes you happy, and that's delightful.
Yeah, and that's how I feel when I read romance, and that's how I feel when I write it, where it's like I feel like if I was to write something darker like horror, then I would have to dive into that darkness in myself and focus on it in the real world too. And it's already everywhere. I can just turn on the news if I want to be scared or depressed.
Yes.
Where if I write my romance, I get to be happy, and they get to be happy, and whoever reads it gets to be happy.
I was just about to say that. It's you're putting positive things out in the world, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
The expression on Samantha's face right now, if you could see it, she just looks, she's got her, like, sweater, like, cardigan thing on, and she's all wrapped up in it, and she just has the most content look on her face right now. So you made her very happy, DK.
You just made me feel cozy. Like,
Yes.
I'm tucked in with my blankie.
And your tea.
My
and...
tea. I do have tea, so.
Yes.
Because no good interview goes without tea, so.
Oh, mine's with coffee.
Well,
coffee's my fuel.
Coffee.
You're not a coffee fan?
No, I'm not. I could down like 6 to 8 cups of tea a day.
And you do.
I do. Yeah. Yeah.
I drink both, so I'm Switzerland in this conversation. So
that's okay.
Yeah, I go with both, but if I had to choose, coffee hands down.
Yeah. That's okay.
She still likes you.
You'll still talk to me? You'll still talk to me?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can still be on the show. It's cool.
Please don't start a beverage riot on our program.
Beverage riot?
Yes, beverage riot.
Sounds like a show.
It does.
It's like...
It should be on, like, Cooking Channel or
It
Food
does,
Network.
Beverage riot.
Yeah.
Today!
Yes. Kombucha versus...
That'd be amazing. That would be awesome. This is
you guys
totally
might want to
copyrighted
copyright
by
that
Shameless
name.
Sports Podcast.
Yeah. We were
so
talking
fun.
to our listeners. We were talking before the air about how we're all rather tired going into this, and this could very easily go off the rails, and I think it just happened.
Yeah,
What?
maybe.
What'd you call it?
Beverage riot.
Beverage riot. No, I think it's a great idea. I really do. I'm gonna call it Food Network.
No, you aren't. I made it up. You're not stealing my idea.
This is Shameless Plugs Podcast, and it is a co-idea. Because I started the beverage riot.
Okay, so then when your novel gets published, it's a co-idea because I talked to you about it.
I mean, same goes for you, buddy, so...
Oh, Yes, we have gone completely off the
I'm
rails.
so sorry. We should probably.
That's all right. I'm just sipping my coffee and listening to the Douglas Riot.
We're just gonna play that clip as a promotion for our podcast. I'm just sipping my coffee, listening to you.
Yes. Because, that's what you should do when you bring a guest on, is just talk to each other and have them listen.
It's amusing.
Professional podcasting 101, right up in this piece. So,
What are you gonna do about it?
So, since you are writing a series, do you have a sense of kind of the timeline that your readers can expect when books are going to come out and everything? I guess my question is, how far along in this process are you? You've got a series, but what does that process look like for you?
Well, I'm on a timeline because I signed with a publishing house. So they have me on a timeline when each one has to go out. Mm-hmm. Like the second book is due out in October, I believe. It's the tentative date right around October. So so for me, they already have the second book. I just have to get the edits back. And I'm working on the third, getting ready to send it out to beta readers. And I started outlining for the fourth book. So being under contract is keeping me on schedule. Otherwise, I could probably tend to go off the rails and think about other characters or other story ideas, but this is keeping me focused.
I was just going to ask you that. Is it was the timeline for you scary when they were like, okay, we need this, 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 and this on these dates? Or were you like, oh, thank goodness?
Yeah.
It's a little bit of both, because I went the traditional route with an agent and a publishing house and all that. So when I had my agent, she said, okay, we'll go ahead and do the whole series when we contact publishing houses. So they usually only pick up the first story and see how it goes and all that type of stuff. I said, okay, and we wrote up the little blurb for each of the stories, and I just kept plugging along and writing them. But I took my time, because I'm not a super fast writer, and figured, I've got a lot of time for those other stories. But then when they signed me for all 4 stories, I was like, yes, that's awesome. Oh, shit, I got to write 4 stories. So then, then after that, it was like, okay, then I wrote out my own timeline. So then if I start getting sidetracked by doing, social media stuff, or then I need to make sure I'm working on the book first. The book comes first before everything else.
Right.
So it's probably better that I don't get sidetracked by other fun stuff, that's always in the back of my mind.
Mm-hmm. We've featured a bunch of self-published authors on the show. We've featured some people who are working with publishers but haven't necessarily nailed down an entire series. So could you speak a little bit, since you're kind of different for the guests that we've had on thus far, could you speak a little bit to what it was like working with the publisher, whether it was in terms, anything, whether it was in terms of book design or the jacket design, whether it was in terms of what input you had on the timeline. What has that experience been like for you?
Well, for me, overall, it's been very positive. Who I signed with, when the back and forth is really good. So I haven't had anything where, they give me a timeline, but say with this first book, when I wasn't comfortable with certain things and it was being rushed, we said, okay, we'll move the timeline for you. And then I said, okay. So then I contacted my agent about the second book. Can we move that timeline? And that works, because we want a good quality book to come out. Mm-hmm. And when it was time for the cover, what they do is they sent me paperwork, describe the kind of cover you want, and show us pictures of what you like, what you don't like. And then they designed the cover based off that. And then they sent me the cover and just asked what I thought. And, I had, I said, simple stuff. I thought the font I didn't care for the font, or I didn't care for the color. So then they went back to the designer who made it and made those changes, and I loved it. So, and that's what I like. This is the reason why I went traditional is, for one, to give me a timeline so I don't mess around too much, and somebody to ask questions to and to help, I don't know how I would have went around to find an editor to edit my book or to design my cover, and I didn't want to be only on Kindle Unlimited.
Yeah.
So those were my overall reasons for doing it, and I liked having the back and forth that somebody I can ask, either I can ask my publisher questions or I can ask my agent questions. And it was the same thing when it was time to sign the contract with the publishing house. My agent read it first, and she picked up on stuff that she said, well, let me ask them about this because you may not want it that way, you know, where I never would have caught it reading that contract over myself. And if I have, and in the end, if I have issues, I can always come to her for help, and she'll, you know, she's got my back.
Right. I know Samantha and I are both working on going that same route ourselves. So a lot of the things that you're mentioning, they resonate with, I don't want to speak for Samantha, but they resonate with me because those are the same kind of things that I have thought about when I was debating self-published versus traditional route.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And it's nice to hear from you and hear you talk about the relationship with your agent.
Yes.
And they, you know, agents do more than just sell your book to publishers.
Absolutely.
And it's nice to hear you talk about that aspect of it as well, because I think that not all new novelists know that.
Yeah.
Know that the agent is there in a lot greater capacity than what we initially think. And
that kind of segues into the next question I was going to ask. Is there anything that you think, because a lot of our listeners are writers themselves, is there anything that you think unpublished writers, you would like to point out to them about working with an agent or a publisher?
Let me think for that one for a second.
Sorry, I kind of put you on the spot with that one. Apologies.
Jeez, Pete.
Like, I don't know, like specifically why they would want to go with an agent or a publishing house versus self-publishing.
I mean, if you think that's something that they should know, then yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, it also comes with what kind of book that you're writing too. I can get, if you're writing something that a lot of the publishing houses would have a hard time accepting, then I could see where you would want to go the non-traditional route and self-publish yourself. With an agent, I mean, the things to always be aware of is first, ask a lot of questions before you sign. And for me, romance writing, the genre itself is very helpful. There's a group called RWA, Romance Writers of America, and they have a loop where you can go on and ask, hey, have you heard of this publisher? And they have a site that they set up that you can tell who are publishers in good standing. And so there's just my advice, whether it's a publisher or an agent, is just do your homework before you sign. Don't get excited. Don't get too excited that somebody wants your book or wants to represent you. Just research it first, because when you sign with an agent, you're stuck with them for a long time. Yeah. Same with the publisher; they own your book for a long time. So you want to make sure that you made the right choice, because there's lasting consequences if you don't.
Absolutely. All right, I think we have reached the point in our show where we ask our 3 questions that we ask of all of our guests. Boom, boom, boom. First question, and I have a feeling I know where this one's going. Plotter or pantser?
Believe it or not, I'm a little bit of both. It's like 80% plotting and 20% just see where the story goes. And it really depends on the story. Like,
absolutely.
The first story was all just pantsing, and God, I had a lot of rewrites. And then the second one, I had it plotted from beginning to end. The third one, I had it plotted out up until like the black moment, they call, where everything falls apart.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, once I get there, I'll just know, because the consequences will work its way up. And then I got there, and I was like, yeah, now what? So book 4, I am plotting that from beginning to end, because I had that second book plotted out, and it wrote pretty much like a dream. It was just smooth. So
nice.
Yeah,
80-20, that's about what I am.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
85-15 maybe, but, you know, whatever.
What are you, ground beef now?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. You've seen me in the morning, apparently. Anyway.
My nickname at the gym.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's Ground Chuck.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ground Chuck at the gym. Yikes.
Anyway.
Moving on.
Second question.
All right, so we have a tendency to get our best ideas in some pretty inconvenient locations, like the shower, while we're driving.
Mm-hmm.
Always the shower.
Baby. Always in the shower.
Always in the shower.
Always in the shower,
Yep.
right? I know.
Mm-hmm.
And
Or right as I'm getting ready to fall asleep.
Yep.
mm-hmm. Yep.
Yep.
I could not sleep the other night because I had an idea rattling around in my brain and I wouldn't let myself fall asleep, and so finally I had to write it down.
I understand.
See, I wish I was that way. I'd be like, oh, I'll remember it in the morning, and then I wake up and I'm like, oh, I know it was good too. I know it, and it's gone.
Okay, I have to go off on a small tangent for a moment.
Go for it.
Yesterday I had a moment where, speaking of inopportune times, I was washing dishes and I just got this character idea in my head because, I write superhero stuff. I love cosmic characters and everything. I got this idea to add some depth to a cosmic character. So I took the kids down to the basement after I finished washing dishes, and I spent an hour and a half making up a spreadsheet of all my characters and what category they fall under. Also, I could write notes about this character that I thought of. So, yeah, total plotter moment.
Well, I think it sounds like a great moment because you got it all written down and
Thank
good
you.
to go. And I have to ask you, too, because I actually like comic books. I loved comic books. I read X-Men,
Awesome.
Sandman, all of them.
Nice.
So I have to ask, what is your favorite comic book character?
Okay, so from the time I was 6 years old, I fell in love with Spider-Man. Spider-Man is my all-time favorite. Peter Parker Spider-Man is my absolute all-time favorite. It was the idea of nothing ever goes right for him, but he always does the right thing. Just made me fall in love with that character. My favorites growing up were the Avengers and the X-Men. I was a Marvel guy more so than DC. Like, I respected DC's characters, but I've always been more of a Marvel guy. So the Marvel Cinematic Universe has pretty much been my dream come true. I love most things, though. Like, I've read non-superhero stuff, like you mentioned Sandman. I loved, that. I loved Neil Gaiman's work and everything. I loved, there's a China Clugston Major, like, for some offbeat stuff. There's a series called Blue Mondays, and it's just about these teenagers who love Adamant and stuff like that. And it's just, like, fun books like that. So I started out being a total superhero freak. I am still a total superhero freak, even though I don't actively read comics anymore, but it branched off to all different things like Sandman and, Blue Monday and everything else. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Who's your favorite now, though? Since you brought it up, I have to ask the question.
Well, what it started out was probably when I was young, it was Batman. I probably seen one of the Batman movies and just fell in love with it. And then I moved to X-Men.
Yeah.
And I adored X-Men, and then I moved over to, I think it was DC, and I started reading Preacher and Sandman and pretty much anything Neil Gaiman wrote, whether it was comic books or his books. And, I mean, I still read them. If I go to the library and something catches my eye. In fact, recently, I think last summer, I went and reread all of the Sandman series again because I read them back in high school, and they were still as good as they were. They're just timeless.
I still remember one of my favorite things was there was a competition, and it was the Sandman, and he was like I can't remember the specifics because it's been so long since I've read it, but there was a competition to make something, it was like a verbal competition to make something bigger and more powerful, and it ended with Sandman talking about...
Who got the gates to hell?
Yeah, and he ended up with hope was the thing that he brought up, and the demon couldn't beat that. It was just like, oh my God, that's such a great moment.
That was my favorite part too. I still remember that.
Yeah.
In fact, and it's on Netflix now. There's a show called Lucifer.
Yes. Yeah.
It's based off that scene.
Is it? I did not know that.
Oh, wow.
I did not know that.
Well, it's not based off that scene exactly, but that was when Lucifer Morningstar left to go get his Vegas. He just walked away from hell, said he didn't want to take care of it anymore. He's going to go to Las Vegas and just open a nightclub.
Gotcha.
And that's what Lucifer's show is. It's based off that when he left.
Oh, that's awesome. I did not know that.
Cool.
Yeah, I watched it. I was watching it, and I was like, oh, my God, somebody totally stole Neil Gaiman's idea. And then I looked it up, and I was like, oh, no, he helped write it. Never mind. Because it's just one small piece in the whole Sandman series, and they based that series that's like on season, I don't know how many years now.
Yeah, that's really cool. I did not know that. I'm getting
Yeah, I know.
character interview sheets.
Right.
I'm learning stuff.
I don't know what's going on here. No, that's awesome. That's so cool. Aww.
Yeah. There's a Good Omens series starting soon, too.
I saw
It
it.
may have
Yeah, I
already
wanna
started on
see
Amazon
that.
Prime.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it yet, but
The book is great. The
Yes,
book
it
is
is.
hilarious.
Yes.
It is hilarious. And then they had that, he did another one, too. He did American Gods.
yes.
Was a TV series, too.
I have a beef with American Gods because I love American Gods. I haven't seen the show, but I read the novel, and I love the novel. But
Yeah,
here's
don't
my
see
beef.
the series
Here's my beef.
if you love the book.
Really? It's worth checking out?
No, it's not.
Oh, it's not. Oh, I misunderstood.
No, because
Really?
see, I'm with you. I loved American Gods. The book is one of my favorite, but the series just didn't do it for me. The people they picked to play them are spot on,
Yeah.
and they're great actors. But there's just something about it. It didn't resonate like the book did. It's just,
Really?
it's like I feel like they tried to just wow us with violence more than the storyline.
Hate that.
Yeah.
So every listener is about to hate me right now because
dear.
I loved American Gods, the novel, but I had a major beef with it because I was working at a library when I read that, and like 5 years before I ever read that, I had this idea, like, because I love mythology and everything, I'm going to write a novel that's all about, like, gods, what kind of gods people would worship in the modern day and everything, and it was going to be a god of technology, and then I read that novel, I'm like, well, I guess I'm never writing that book.
Yep, that was taken away from you.
Yes. Yeah.
Ripped right underneath your feet.
Exactly, and I was working on other things, so it was just one of those ideas that sat and that I always meant to come back to, and yep, never doing that, because I'm just going to look like I completely ripped off a much more established author.
Yeah.
Yep, you're gonna have to let that one go.
Yeah.
Well, what I learned from American Gods is for one, because I read it a long time ago. I don't know, like years ago, probably 10, 15 years ago, and I have a son who came to me looking for and he read like the whole Percy Jackson series and all of that, and he was like, I want a book, and I'm like, I have a great book for you. You should read this one. And he takes it to school and he reads it, and then he comes home and he's got a shell-shocked look on his face, and he's like, what did you give me? And you remember the one goddess, what she does? You happen to remember that part? I don't know if they say it online.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about now. Yeah, we got to be cryptic, but yeah.
And so he's telling me this, and I'm like, what? You're making this? Because how I forgot that scene, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yep, sent my kid off to read that. So now he won't take any book suggestions from me anymore.
I'm sorry you had that experience, but I totally get it. So.
That's so funny.
I have been skittish about that because I read comics for like 20 years. I've still got my whole comic collection, and my kids have asked me if they can read some of the books, and the dorky collector of me is, well, let's wait till you're a little older and you aren't playing with slime and stuff. But then the other side of me is like, some of the stuff I read, I really need to make sure there's nothing in there that they shouldn't be seeing.
Yeah, bear my warning. Read it again first.
Yeah. Thanks for the reminder.
Oh, that's funny.
So, third question. And this can be anything at all that you want to use. What do you want to plug?
My book?
Yeah.
All right.
Go for it.
Shameless plugs with a shameless plug. I love
Woo!
it. So many people try to be noble. Just plug your work.
Yeah,
I love it.
I know. I love it too.
Well, I mean, I love my story. I want to share it with the world. So how else can I share it if people don't know about it?
Exactly.
Agreed. read.
Exactly.
Even though I'm terrible at plugging my book, because then once you're like, okay, well, tell me about it. I don't know. It's great. Read the book.
I mean, just read it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't even need to talk about it. Just read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll get it. The first chapter. Just read the first chapter, and
Yeah.
you'll believe me. It's good.
Go on.
Did you hear this interview and how personable and great I am? Just go read the book, okay?
If you like me, you'll like my book. If you don't like me, you still like my book. Just read it.
That is the correct answer.
I love that attitude.
Yes.
Oh my god.
Yes.
That's amazing.
And for the record, on our site, we will have links, of course, to where you can buy the book. We will have links to
Absolutely.
DK's site.
Yeah.
So, Fairy Tale Lies, Opposites Attract, out now.
Yeah. Go buy it.
Yeah,
Go
go
buy
read it.
Go read it. Go buy it.
It's the end of the episode. You can stop listening to us now. Go buy it.
Go buy the book.
Yeah.
Go buy the book.
All right. Of course, we want to thank DK Marie for joining us today. All the information is up there. Check it out. Make sure you check out our stuff. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Bye, outlets. Till next time.
Bye.